My name is Peter. I used to be a Jehovah's Witness for 19 years. This is pretty much going to go through everything from a broad stroke perspective, as far as things I dealt with when I was in the religion and some of the circumstances that pretty much caused me to get out of said religion. So growing up, I found out later on that I was not a wanted pregnancy. My parents got married to kind of old fashioned, was kind of, there was a process. You get married first, then you have the kid. So since my mother got pregnant, they decided to get married. And I do feel like that did cause a lot of resentment towards me later on, not being planned. Growing up, they were both very abusive towards me. In different ways. One of the earliest memories I have of my father actually was when I had to be around maybe 4 years old. I was an only child at the time. I had lied about peeing on the seat, and the way he was reacting to it, I was really nervous. So he questioned me as far as, did I do it? And I said no. And he kept screaming at me, so I kept saying no, I didn't do it. And he ended up picking me up by my shirt and slamming me up against the wall and screaming into my face. And my mother just stood behind him and watched. Didn't do anything to stop the situation. She herself, when she was in a mood, she would have me pull my pants down, bend over the bed, and she would whip me with her belt. As far as Jehovah's Witness life goes, this is kind of where she got baptized when I was still young. So this was something that it came up very early in my childhood, but it never went away. So she got baptized early. I was actually there for her baptism, I remember, New York City. They don't believe in birthdays, holidays, pretty much anything that takes any attention away from Jehovah, anything that would take any kind of priority for a day to worship. So anything like a birthday was considered pagan, and therefore you were not allowed to participate in it. So I grew up with never being allowed to celebrate my birthday. If I was in a school classroom and there was a birthday celebration going on, I would have to get up out of the classroom and go sit in the hallway. And, kids picked up on that after a while. Being singled out like that, because you're pretty much trained to stand out. You're trained to be different from everyone else. You're not encouraged to defend yourself. I was always told not to defend myself because Jesus would turn the other cheek. So very early on, since elementary school up, I was used to being bullied and beaten by my classmates on a regular basis, all throughout my entire school experience, all the way up until high school graduation. Another thing that we were indoctrinated with was Armageddon, which is the end of the world. Basically, anyone who is not a Jehovah's Witness is doomed to die a horrific death. And since I was a child, a very young child, I was bombarded with imagery in publications that Jehovah's Witnesses published that portrayed people being destroyed, killed in all kinds of various ways. It was very much glorified, and I found that to be very odd. Why would we look forward to so many people dying like this? And their explanations was always, well, because the world is going to be cleansed and all that's going to be left are the good people. And even if you were a Jehovah's Witness, that didn't really guarantee that you were going to make it. You pretty much had to be hyper vigilant all the time. You had to constantly watch what you were listening to. If you were watching anything that had violence in it, if you were anything that had sexuality to it, you were not to partake in. Other members were also conditioned to tattle on you. So if anyone had seen you outside, say, smoking a cigarette, and you're not supposed to be smoking cigarettes, Jehovah's Witnesses are very against cigarettes, drugs, alcohol, anything. So they would rat you out and you would be in trouble. And part of the mind control that they do put into place is making sure that you're constantly looking over your shoulder to make sure that people in your life are actually worthy of being in your life, as far as, will these people actually make it past Armageddon? If they won't, do they give you bad vibes? Do they have this term bad association? Which also meant that I was not allowed to have friends because there were no Jehovah's Witnesses in my school. I could not hang out with people. I could not go to parties. I could not call people. I eventually just started to do it kind of behind their back, but I was not allowed to be within the company of people who were not Jehovah's Witnesses. And growing up as a child, having no other Jehovah's Witness friends in a school where you're being made fun of, you're being abused at home, 3 days a week, you're being indoctrinated and brainwashed, it makes it very difficult, and it's a very lonely experience. Early on, I did realize that I was gay. I just did not understand what it meant to be gay. I just noticed that I was attracted to boys and not girls. And I didn't really know what to make of that for a while. This led to a lot of weird issues as well, because once my parents kind of caught on to that there might be an issue with that, I caught all kinds of hell for it. My mother even, at some point, she would come into my bedroom and she would pull my underwear open, look at my penis to make sure I wasn't hard, because she wanted to make sure that I wasn't in my room masturbating. And if I was ever caught masturbating or anything like that, I was heavily screamed at and discouraged. So she would actually go to my father and tell him, like, your son, I think he's masturbating, and he would call me into the room and scream at me to do it. And it's a perfectly natural thing that I should never have had shame growing up feeling to do. She would constantly call elders of the congregation. They're basically like the leaders of the congregation. So anytime anything was going on, she would use that as a manipulative tool. She would constantly call them over to come and sit down with me, have conversations. I once had them come over for like the stupidest thing. It was, I colored a coloring book, and I kind of made them a little gothy because I was teen and angsty, and you know, that's what you do. And she had them show up and put the picture down in front of them. They went through a whole speech. They read scriptures to me talking about how wrong this was, identifying with the world, this and that, and basically just made my life a living hell every chance they got. So there were instances where, as siblings, you fight. You know, you get into arguments. It's kind of what you do growing up. You know, if you have brothers and sisters, you get into arguments. It happens. There was one particular time where I got into an argument with my brother, and my mother actually told me to come with her. She drove me to one of the elders' wives' houses, and she left me there. And when the elder's wife came out, she told her, I'm done with him. If you want him so badly, you can have him. And, you know, being an angsty teen, being someone who's going through depression, not knowing what to do with themselves, not being able to figure them out, you're standing on a stranger's doorstep, watching your parent drop you off and tell you they don't want you. They don't want you in their life anymore. This was a mistake. You can have this instead. So, a lot of that. By the time I'd reached around age 9 to 12, around there somewhere, I was molested by an older boy that was staying with the family. I did not understand what was happening. I just knew that he offered me a Game Boy if I revealed my penis to him. And as a kid, you know, Game Boy, big deal. Didn't really know what the hell I was doing. I did it. And so that led to a bunch of other problems where it continued. He exposed me to pornography for the first time. And it's so confusing as a child. You don't know what you're looking at. You're not really sure why this is happening. But you do have some weird sense of this is supposed to be a secret because of the way that it was being handled. So I would keep my mouth shut about it, like everything else that was happening. Once it came out, it was found out. I know years later, my dad actually took me to a gym when I was around 16 or so and told me that if I ever came out and told him that I was gay, that he would not accept that and he would not be able to accept it. I was in a really bad place around the time, so I started to cut myself on my arms and legs, mostly my legs because people wouldn't see it. This became kind of like an addiction. I would come home and just take a knife when no one was home and just start cutting, because I didn't know, I needed something else to focus on, and the pain somehow took my mind off of everything else. Once that was found out from my school, I was hospitalized twice. And the first time I remember leaving the guidance counselor's office after she explained to them, like, your son's going to have to go to a hospital. And when the meeting was over, both of my parents got up and walked out and didn't say anything to me. I had to follow them. They didn't speak a word. They didn't care. They didn't have words for me at all. Because of this kind of behavior, I was running away from home often. I would just leave. I would try to find somewhere else to go because the abuse was intense, particularly in my part because I was the oldest, and my father would never really touch my sister, at least not that I knew of in front of me anyway. So it was very much where everything kind of fell down on me somehow, and I just couldn't handle the pressure on top of being a normal kid, on top of being in school, on top of trying to keep good grades and everything else that was going on. I just couldn't handle it, so I would run away. I did call the cops on my father at one point because I was scared, and the cops showed up. They talked to him. He basically said, oh, he's crazy. He went to a mental institution. He's suicidal, blah, 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 blah. They didn't even bother talking to me. They took his word for it and left. And years after that, anyone in my family who had heard about that blamed me for it and made me feel like the bad person for calling the cops. Jehovah's Witnesses do a lot of victim blaming. So whenever I would call an elder and try to tell them, hey, these things are going on, I need help, he would say things like, well, Pete, can I ask you a question? Do you think you were a pleasure to have in the house? Do you really think that, that your presence is enjoyed? And I would try to tell my mom that they were saying things like this to me, and she would say, no, you're lying. They didn't say that. You're lying. You're making things up. At one point, my father did abuse my mother to the point where she came to me as a child and asked me if she thought if she should leave him or not. And that was above my expertise. I didn't know what to say about that exactly. But later on that night, she tried to kill herself with me sleeping in the next room. The household was to the point where they would come into the room and just turn my music off for no reason. Like, they would just show up and bully me for nothing. Like, I would be minding my business, door closed and everything. Come on in, take my music off, and walk out. Close the door again. When I was 19, I finally came out and told my grandparents what was happening with the abuse, and it led to a huge blowout. I'm going to have to do this in a separate segment, but I will continue from where I left off. Thank you for anyone who has listened to this, and I appreciate your support. Thank you.